Hey guys, so a while back I uploaded a couple of retrospective videos about Star Trek the original series and the TOS movies. I thought some of you guys might like a supercut version of that video, so without further ado, here it is. And don't forget to subscribe, because there's more on the way. Star Trek the original series, the one that started it all, the classic sci-fi series that aired from 1966 to 1969, TOS was groundbreaking in many ways, and has inspired millions with its optimistic vision of the future. It of course went on to spawn an entire franchise that includes movies, spin-off shows, video games, comics, and more. All stuff that veteran subscribers of this channel have heard me talk about ad nauseum. I've reviewed The Next Generation on this channel, and before I move on to Deep Space Nine or any other series, I wanted to discuss TOS's lore contributions, as well as offer my opinions on several of the episodes. It should go without saying that while I intend for this video to be more of a lore analysis and not specifically a review, it will contain spoilers for TOS and other Trek, so if that's something that you care about, you've been warned. Without further ado, let's get started. Before we go any further, I'd like to take a moment to talk to you about today's sponsor, me. Do you like merchandise? If so, head on over to the new and improved OrangeRiver merch store. That's right, OrangeRiver is now officially on Spreadshop. I've got a bunch of awesome new designs, including All the Way Down,
All the Way,
Vape God, Tally, aka Best Girl.
it was totally worth it.
And what is perhaps my greatest design yet,
I love being married to my husband.
plus I've got some of my classic designs like OrangeRiver Arrowhead, N7, Metroid, Mycelial Network,
The mycelial network is like
Mycelial Network, and more. And there are even some new products like OrangeRiver hats. That's right, OrangeRiver hats now exist. Visit the link in the description to get discounts and other special deals on items from my store. Now, back to the video. The concept for Star Trek the original series emerged from Gene Roddenberry's interest in science fiction dating all the way back to the 1940s. He sold his first sci-fi story to television in 1956 and later went on to produce his first television series, The Lieutenant, for MGM. By 1963, MGM was of the opinion that action-adventure shows would become the next big thing, and were receptive to hearing Roddenberry's ideas for Star Trek, which he had been developing since 1960. However, the studio was not enthusiastic about the concept, prompting Roddenberry to shop his Wagon Train to the Stars with various networks like CBS. By 1964, it was rumored that Desilu was interested in buying a new series, and after multiple rejections from other studios, Roddenberry took his chances with Desilu. This paid off, with Desilu agreeing to a 3-year deal in April 1964. The vice president of programming at NBC had Roddenberry write 3 story outlines, one of which would be turned into a pilot. This resulted in Star Trek's first pilot, The Cage, being selected. Roddenberry recruited many people to help him flesh out his vision of the future, including the Rand Corporation's Harvey P. Lynn as science consultant, Pato Guzman as art director, and Matt Jeffries as assistant production designer. Guzman was later replaced by Franz Bacalin. Robert H. Justman was hired as an assistant director for the pilot, having previously worked on The Outer Limits. Makeup artist Fred Phillips was also brought in, his first task to create Spock's ears. After pre-production throughout the summer, The Cage was shot in fall 1964 on Culver Studios stages 14, 15, and 16. Roddenberry convinced Jeffrey Hunter to play Captain Pike, originally named Captain April and later Captain Winter. Leonard Nimoy and Majel Barrett had worked with Roddenberry on The Lieutenant and were cast as Science Officer Spock and Pike's XO, number 1, respectively. Veteran actor John Hoyt was cast as Dr. Phil Boyce, Peter Duria as Jose Tyler, and Laurel Goodwin as Yeoman J.M. Colt. Extras were cast from a diversity of ethnic groups, significant because integration was not a usual occurrence on 1960s television, and racial segregation was still a reality in the United States. While much of the footage from The Cage is reused in the two-part Season 1 episode The Menagerie, TOS's first pilot introduces many core elements of the Trek universe. I'm talking the Enterprise, Star Trek's planetary classification system, transporters, Orions, even Spock and some of the other characters. Captain Christopher Pike calls his first officer, Una Chen Riley, Number 1, a moniker Jean-Luc Picard uses for Commander William Riker in The Next Generation. As many have noted, Spock's portrayal in The Cage is markedly different from his characterization throughout the rest of the series, and most of the franchise for that matter. In The Cage, Spock shows emotion. He smiles and acts human in several ways that matter, his main alien feature being his appearance, like his pointed ears. Indeed, it was Number 1 in The Cage and Roddenberry's original conception of Star Trek who embodied the cold, logical personality. According to Leonard Nimoy, when James T. Kirk replaced Pike as captain of the Enterprise in the second pilot, Nimoy found that William Shatner's exuberant energy enabled him to play Spock as more reserved. Regardless, The Cage, in my opinion, sets the stage quite well for much of what's to come in TOS, even if it didn't actually air until 1988. We meet a Pike who has clearly been in command for years and is even considering resigning, burdened with having to make so many lethal decisions. Weeks before, Pike had led an away team on Rigel 7 that left several crewmen injured and cost 3 lives. This uneasiness with command is echoed in the first episode of Strange New Worlds, and we even get something of a follow-up to this Rigel mission in Strange New Worlds Season 2's Among the Lotus Eaters. But Pike's chief medical officer, Dr. Boyce, talks him out of resigning. Spock informs the captain that the Enterprise has received a distress call from a crashed ship on Talos 4, the SS Columbia, which crash-landed there 18 years ago. As it turns out, this is all an illusion. There's only one survivor of the Columbia, Vina, kept young in appearance by the Talosians, who plan to mate Pike and Vina to rebuild their civilization that was destroyed by a nuclear holocaust. They find that humans have a natural hatred for captivity, and Pike and his crew are released. While The Cage is a well-written episode, in my opinion, there are certain aspects of it that are difficult to reconcile with canon. If you take the dialogue at face value, helmsman Jose Tyler implies that faster-than-light travel is a relatively new phenomenon, saying,
"And you won't believe how fast you can get back. Well, the time barrier's been broken. Our new ships can..."
This is, of course, inconsistent with the fact that even in Metamorphosis, Zephram Cochrane, the inventor of warp drive, is said to have lived centuries before TOS takes place. That said, Tyler's statement is vague enough that, in-universe, it could be reasoned that he meant something else. Pike also makes a comment about not being used to women on the bridge, which is rather out of place for Trek's 23rd century setting, and indeed was left out of the menagerie. Spock even makes a reference to the Enterprise possessing chemical rocket propulsion as a backup system, something that is never referenced later on. Plus, like I mentioned, his emotionalism runs contrary to his portrayal throughout most of Trek, but Discovery and Strange New Worlds demonstrate that during the 2250s, he was experimenting a lot more with embracing his human side. So I don't view this as a contradiction, necessarily. In any event, even though The Cage is frequently listed alongside the other episodes of Season 1, its status as a rejected pilot really does make it unique compared to the rest of the franchise. Its vibe is much more surrealist than later Trek, even compared to other TOS episodes, though like I said, that doesn't make it bad, just different. While NBC officials liked The Cage, and Desilu executive Herb Solow said they were surprised by how realistic it looked, the pilot was rejected as NBC believed it would only attract a small audience and wanted more action and adventure. They also had problems with Spock's satanic appearance and the presence of a female first officer, because of fucking course, but they still wanted to help make the show a reality. They then made the unprecedented move of ordering a second pilot. Jeffrey Hunter chose not to reprise his role as Pike, mainly on the advice of his wife, who felt Hunter would be typecast in science fiction. Having previously acted in episodes of The Twilight Zone and The Outer Limits, William Shatner was cast as James Kirk, his middle initial being changed after Where No Man Has Gone Before from R to T. Paul Fix was cast as the Doctor, with Canadian actor James Doohan landing the role of Scotty and Japanese-American actor George Takei as Sulu. Robert Dawn replaced Phillips as head makeup artist, but Phillips returned for the series proper. Academy Award-winning cinematographer Ernest Haller came out of semi-retirement to serve as director of photography, and Justman, in addition to still serving as AD, replaced Outer Limits vet Byron Hasen as a producer. After some updates to these sets and props, Where No Man Has Gone Before was shot on Paramount Stages 9 and 10. The new pilot was accepted by NBC, and a full season was ordered for the 1966-1967 broadcast season. History was made. Where No Man Has Gone Before is, in my opinion, a slightly stronger pilot than The Cage. It's more action-oriented, which provides a good balance to the ultra-cerebral aspects of The Cage, and the script is more compact. Spock works much better as a follower of Vulcan logic as opposed to his portrayal in The Cage, setting up part of the triumvirate of Kirk, Spock, and McCoy that offers some of the best banter in all of Star Trek. Of course, the crew still isn't fully assembled yet. McCoy is not present as CMO, instead replaced by Mark Piper. Uhura is not in Where No Man Has Gone Before, and instead actor Lloyd Haynes plays a communications officer named Alden. Furthermore, Sulu is not at the helm. He instead wears a science blue uniform and works in the astrophysics department. But most of the focus of the episode is on the friendship between Kirk and Lieutenant Gary Mitchell, who upon contact with the Milky Way's galactic barrier has begun to develop a variety of psionic abilities, thanks to his high Esper rating. Oh yeah, Where No Man Has Gone Before establishes that some humans are capable of extrasensory perception. This is a pretty big deal, and when discussing Mitchell's accumulation of power, Elizabeth Daner, another Esper, expresses a level of empathy for what she considers could be
A new and better kind of human being.
But in Mitchell's quest for power, he exposes some of humanity's most savage impulses, undermining his cause and bringing forth his demise at Daner's hands. Fun fact, Mitchell mentions a blonde lab technician that Kirk almost married, which is widely considered, retroactively, to be a reference to Dr. Carol Marcus. After Where No Man Has Gone Before, preparation for the full season began in early 1966. The sets were updated once again, as were the uniforms and the Enterprise model. Shatner and Nimoy were kept as the stars, with Grace Lee Whitney joining as human Janice Rand. Interestingly, Shatner, Nimoy, and Whitney were the three most prominently featured in publicity photos. And indeed, I kind of forgot how much Rand was featured in the first season. Doohan and Takei were also kept, and DeForest Kelley was hired to play the new CMO, Dr. McCoy. Finally, Nichelle Nichols landed the role of Communications Officer Uhura, and, of course, went on to become a symbol of racial and gender diversity in the show. Jerry Finnerman became the new DP, while a cadre of other producers joined as assistants to Justman. Gene L. Kuhn became line producer in August 1966, and also regularly contributed as writer, as did Edward K. Milkis and D.C. Fontana, Roddenberry's former secretary. The Corbomite Maneuver, the first episode produced after Where No Man Has Gone Before, is the first episode of TOS, when viewed in that order, that feels like Star Trek, although there are still a few aspects that haven't been fully realized yet. Uhura is in Command Gold rather than Operations Red, which she won't don until The Enemy Within. But Sulu has been permanently transferred to the bridge, and the Enterprise deals with an unknown scientific threat, as is typical of many of the best self-contained classic Trek storylines. The Corbomite Maneuver introduces the First Federation, a small Alpha Quadrant power with whom the United Federation of Planets later forms a cooperative trade relationship, and the imaginary substance Corbomite, which Kirk uses as part of a bluff against Baylock, is mentioned again in Season 2's The Deadly Years, which was later remade into the Next Generation episode Unnatural Selection. Speaking of episodes remade in TNG, another pops up in TOS Season 1, The Naked Time, in which the Enterprise crew falls victim to polywater intoxication, which lowers their inhibitions. The Naked Time offers an early depiction of the romantic tension between Spock and Nurse Christine Chapel, which is also expounded upon in Strange New Worlds. Spock's emotional breakdown amid the polywater intoxication serves as a major early insight into Spock's struggle to control his emotions, a struggle all Vulcans experience, but one that is of course even more difficult for him given his human half. Kirk also comments on how his commitment to Starfleet precludes his ability to make time for a family, a recurring motif that various other episodes, as well as The Wrath of Khan, flesh out. And The Naked Time introduces a form of time travel stemming from a cold restart of the Enterprise's engines to save its orbit from decaying. Kirk and Spock remark on the novelty of this, and as we'll see, the crew makes use of time travel on a few more occasions. One of these is The City on the Edge of Forever, which is considered by many to be the best episode of the series. After discovering an uninhabited planet housing a time machine called the Guardian of Forever, McCoy, suffering from an accidental overdose of a substance called cordrazine, travels back to 1930 Earth, and Kirk and Spock must retrieve him. Arriving several days ahead of McCoy, Kirk and Spock make the acquaintance of a social worker named Edith Keeler. With 1930s radio equipment, Spock is able to build a computer that can access the information on his tricorder. He and Kirk learn that if Keeler does not die in a car accident on a very specific day, she will go on to found a peace movement that keeps the US out of World War II, allowing the Nazis to win the war, which prevents Starfleet and the Federation from ever existing. Some consider this event to be a possible point of divergence for the Mirror Universe, which I've historically argued against, although one can never be sure. Check out my video about the Mirror Universe's history for more info on that front. Anyway, after McCoy arrives in the past, Kirk stops him from saving Edith, thus restoring the timeline. It's a really poignant episode, and one that is, in my opinion, deserving of all of the praise it gets. It's one of multiple strong episodes in Season 1, and indeed, I actually think that Season 1 contains the highest ratio of good to bad episodes. In addition to The Cage and The Menagerie, Where No Man Has Gone Before, The Corbinite Maneuver, and The City on the Edge of Forever, there's roughly another half dozen episodes from Season 1 that I put in the peak quality category. One is Balance of Terror, which introduces the Romulans and offers some lore on the Earth-Romulan War from the late 22nd century. The episode also suggests that cloaking devices are a relatively new invention known to Federation science, even though later in the prequel series Enterprise and Discovery, Suliban and Klingon cloaks are encountered by Starfleet, possibly a change that is a result of the temporal Cold War. The Galileo 7, which sees some of the crew stranded after a shuttle crash on a dangerous planet, has Spock decree that the logical thing to do would have been to leave him after he was separated from the rest of the landing party. He expresses a similar sentiment in Star Trek Into Darkness after Kirk saves Spock from a volcanic eruption on Nibiru, and Kirk realizes that if the roles were reversed, Spock would have left him behind. The Menagerie sees Spock help Pike return to Talos 4 after he suffers from severe radiation burns. Arena sees the powerful Metrons pit Kirk against a Gorn captain after the Gorn attack the Federation colony at Cestus 3, seeing it as an encroachment upon their territory. It is only after Kirk shows mercy for his injured opponent that the Metrons decide to let both captains live. Sympathy for an initially monstrous creature is also displayed in The Devil in the Dark, which introduces the Horta, and an errand of mercy, powerful non-corporeal beings, the Organians, once again intervene in a conflict between the Federation and another space power, namely the Klingons. It also introduces Klingon Commander Kor, who along with Koloth and Kang, goes on to make more appearances in Deep Space Nine. Space Seed, of course, introduces Khan Noonien Singh and the background of the Eugenics Wars, which nearly plunged Earth into a new dark age in the late 1990s, when an away team beams over to the derelict DY-100 class Botany Bay. Enterprise historian Marla McGivers discusses its nature as an interplanetary sleeper ship. She says that such vessels became obsolete in 2018, which is consistent with what we know about human spaceflight in Star Trek after this date. The way that Kirk and the other human officers talk about Khan is quite noteworthy, as while they abhor his ideology, they admire his ambition. Kirk says,
"He was the best of the tyrants, and the most dangerous.
There were no massacres or wars of aggression under Khan's rule, but there was as little freedom, and his rule over a quarter of Earth's population saw a marked drop in scientific advancement. You see, Khan was an augment, a selectively bred lineage of human designed to be faster, stronger, and more intelligent. Khan defends his existence in contrast to Earth's technical accomplishments, which he claims have still hardly allowed humans to take control of their evolution. This provides some context for the later established ban in the Federation on genetic engineering for fear that it might spark another eugenics war. This is probably what led certain individuals to seek other means to improve humanity, such as Dr. Roger Corby, who perfected a not-so-perfect method of creating androids, as seen in What Are Little Girls Made Of? Khan and his followers are of course deposited on Ceti Alpha 5, which is revisited in The Wrath of Khan. Of course, these are not the only episodes of Season 1 that make significant lore contributions. In addition to The Enemy Within, The Naked Time, and What Are Little Girls Made Of, a good bulk of Season 1 I'd put in a middle category when it comes to quality. Not quite reaching the same levels that the best episodes do, but still entertaining and thought-provoking nonetheless. The Man Trap, aired as the first episode of TOS in September 1966, introduces the M113 creature, or Salt Vampire, which has made a number of other appearances. The episode is also one of a few in early TOS that feature Uhura flirting with Spock, and while a relationship doesn't materialize in the Prime universe, a romance between the two characters is of course established in the alternate reality Star Trek films. Spock also says in the episode that Vulcan has no moon, which is hashtag technically correct, as Vulcan has a sister planet called Takut, which has its own moon. Dagger of the Mind introduces the Vulcan mind meld. The Conscience of the King establishes part of Kirk's backstory as an escapee of the massacre on Tarsus 4 at the hands of Kodos the Executioner, a massacre that also claimed the life of Hoshi Sato. The Federation transport carrying the Caridian Company of Players, the Astral Queen, also served as the inspiration for the name of a prison ship in the reimagined Battlestar Galactica, according to Ronald D. Moore. The Squire of Gothos features Trelane, an adolescent member of a super powerful race that many have compared to early versions of the Q. In Tomorrow is Yesterday, a chance encounter with a black star hurtles the Enterprise back to 1969 Earth, where the ship accidentally becomes visible as a UFO. They beam aboard an inbound Air Force pilot named John Christopher, whose son becomes the commander of the first manned mission to Saturn. Kirk tells Christopher that the Enterprise, one of 12 Constitution-class ships in the fleet, is under the authority of the United Earth Space Probe Agency as a combined service. Voyager later confirms that USPA dates back to at least the 2060s, and Enterprise clarifies that USPA was integrated into Starfleet by the 2130s. Towards the end of the episode, we see the first use of the slingshot effect, and Spock suggests using the transporter to reintegrate Christopher with his past self while the Enterprise is in time warp around the sun. The Return of the Archons introduces Beta 3, where the population acts like zombies and blindly obeys the will of their machine ruler, Landru. The episode also introduces the Prime Directive, Starfleet's non-interference policy. Kirk makes an exception for this culture, which he deems has stagnated, a distinction he also invokes in the Season 2 episode A Private Little War. And Operation Annihilate features James T. Kirk's brother Sam, his wife, as well as one of Sam's children, and introduces the idea of the Vulcan inner eyelid. A Taste of Armageddon, which traps the Enterprise crew in the midst of the Eminiar-Vendikar War, introduces Federation diplomat Robert Fox, the namesake of one of the ships carrying El-Orion refugees in Star Trek Generations, and is the first episode to feature Scotty in command of the Enterprise. It also establishes General Order 24, which allows a starship to obliterate an entire planet's population. As has been noted, it's never been discussed if General Order 24 was actually a bluff, or if it's really permitted as a retaliatory action, or whether its disproportionate nature is ever discussed by the crew. But this isn't the first time that it's mentioned that the Enterprise is powerful enough to lay waste to an entire planet's population. Court-Martial and This Side of Paradise are also pretty good episodes that fill in some other minor details about the Star Trek universe, as does Charlie X, which establishes the Enterprise's crew complement is 428. But Charlie X, along with Mudd's Women, which introduces Harry Mudd, Miri, which features a duplicative Earth that experienced a horrible plague, and the Alternative Factor, which confirms the existence of an antimatter dimension, highlights one of the major issues lots of people have with the original series, namely its campiness. Now, almost every episode of the original series has some camp in it, like instances where William Shatner or somebody else overacts, but for the most part, TOS Season 1 has some of the strongest writing in the show. TOS Season 2 introduces some other iconic elements of Star Trek, including Ensign Pavel Chekhov, who by the third episode, Friday's Child, is firmly established as the Enterprise's primary navigator. He has a prominent role and opportunity for romance in The Apple, in which the Enterprise encounters a civilization on Gamma Trianguli 6 that worships a machine god called Vol. Chekhov and Uhura get a chance to accompany Kirk on an away mission in the Gamesters of Triskelion, which pits the crew against other aliens for the entertainment of the providers, ancient brains and vats. Scotty is given the spotlight in Wolf in the Fold, in which he is accused of murders later revealed to be the work of the non-corporeal entity Red Jack. Friday's Child and The Apple establish Scotty as second officer and give more screen time to him in command, as does Bread and Circuses, in which the crew encounters a planet where the Roman Empire never fell. That's actually a recurring motif in Season 2, more so than Season 1. The Enterprise finds lots of planets with cultures patterned after Earth history, whether by coincidence or human interference. While I think Bread and Circuses is entertaining enough, even better stories of this variety, in my opinion, can be found in A Piece of the Action and Patterns of Force, featuring cultures based on Chicago mobsters and Nazi Germany, respectively. A much more cringeworthy episode with such a premise is The Omega Glory, often ranked as one of the worst episodes of TOS. This episode features two sides of a planet-wide war, the Yangs and the Combs, patterned after America and Asia, respectively. But while the Yangs are portrayed as noble savages, the Combs are still depicted as oppressive, which various writers have noted fails to deconstruct Cold War stereotypes of Asian people. There's also the ending, in which Kirk preaches about the merits of the US Constitution, and while this is not the most objectionable part to me, it's so obviously shoehorned in. Patterns of Force is hardly flawless either, as Federation historian John Gill, who has violated the Prime Directive to establish a totalitarian regime on Ecos, describes Nazi Germany as the most efficient state in Earth history. Gill is clearly off his rocker, but Spock agrees, citing how radically Germany was able to turn its luck around from being defeated in World War I to bordering on global domination. Except, to describe the Nazis as efficient is ahistorical. It ignores all of the inefficiencies that plague authoritarian regimes and just runs contrary to historical consensus. But Roddenberry's proclivity for inserting political parables, a staple of classic Star Trek, takes other forms as well. Two episodes present somewhat contradictory commentaries on the Vietnam War. One of them is The Omega Glory, which, to its credit, does have Kirk tell the Yangs that the values of liberty and freedom apply to their enemies as well. But in an episode that was produced and aired weeks before, A Private Little War, in which the Klingons provide a Stone Age society with advanced weaponry, Kirk lectures Bones about the need for a balance of power. A Private Little War, which takes place on the planet Neural, is one of two appearances in TOS of Dr. Joseph Mbinga, a regular in Strange New Worlds, and also introduces the notorious ape-like Mugato. Klingons prominently feature as well in one of the most memorable episodes of the original series overall, The Trouble with Tribbles, which of course introduces the Tribbles. And William Campbell, who played Trelane in The Squire of Gothos, plays Klingon Commander Koloth. This episode is of course revisited in Deep Space Nine when the Defiant crew travels back in time to stop a plot against James Kirk's life. We also see various aspects of the Federation fleshed out in various top-tier Season 2 episodes like Amok Time and Journey to Babel. Amok Time depicts the Enterprise's first visit to Vulcan as Spock undergoes Pon farr, and introduces T'Pring, Spock's betrothed, who ultimately rejects him by invoking a Vulcan combat ritual. We also meet T'Pau, a younger version of whom is later seen in the fantastic Enterprise 3-part episode The Forge, Awakening, and Kirshara. And of course, T'Pring is in multiple episodes of Strange New Worlds. Journey to Babel, of course, marks the first on-screen appearance of Spock's father Sarek, and introduces core Federation member races like the Andorians and Tellarites. A diverse group of aliens is gathered for the Babel Conference to discuss the admission to the Federation of Corridon, a planet whose people we ultimately meet in Enterprise. Spock's decision not to attend the Vulcan Science Academy in favor of attending Starfleet Academy is also depicted in the 2009 Star Trek film. The, in my opinion, underrated Obsession, in which Kirk seeks to hunt down a monstrous cloud creature he failed to destroy years ago, offers some insight into his early Starfleet career and service aboard the USS Farragut. A number of surprising encounters in Season 2 include meeting Zefram Cochrane, inventor of warp drive and metamorphosis, the Greek god Apollo in Who Mourns for Adonais, and yes, that's how it's pronounced, and a giant space amoeba in the Immunity Syndrome, which marks the first reference to a Starfleet ship, the Intrepid, that is crewed entirely by Vulcans. More spaceborne threats of an artificial variety rear their heads in multiple episodes too. In The Doomsday Machine, the crew discovers a massive planet killer of likely extragalactic origin, and Commodore Matt Decker, who production sources indicate was intended to be the father of Will Decker, jeopardizes the ship in an attempt to avenge his own fallen crew. The Changeling sees the Enterprise encounter Nomad, an Earth probe that later became augmented upon contact with an alien intelligence, a similar plot to the motion picture. Such dangers of artificial intelligence are also front and center in The Ultimate Computer, which sees the Enterprise host a demonstration of the M5 Multitronic unit, created by Richard Daystrom, namesake of the Daystrom Institute, and AI's shortcomings are demonstrated as well in I, Mudd, the second appearance of Harry Mudd, who has fled to an uncharted planet populated by androids. These androids' makers, who are from the Andromeda Galaxy, are explicitly described as being non-humanoid, which is in accordance to the oft-stated idea in the series that humanoid life is rare even within the Milky Way galaxy itself. Other aliens from Andromeda, the Kelvins, take human form and hijack the Enterprise in By Any Other Name. And an even more surprising encounter happens in Cat's Paw, when the Enterprise uncovers extragalactic bird-like aliens who have also taken human form and projected illusions of witches, black cats, and a haunted castle. But the suggestion that ancient humanoids populated various planets in the galaxy underpins the episode Return to Tomorrow, as the crew meets remaining members of the Oretian civilization, which may have influenced the evolution of the Vulcan species. Return to Tomorrow also features Diana Muldaur as Dr. Anne Mulhall, 20 years before she joined the cast of The Next Generation as Dr. Catherine Pulaski. Mirror Mirror introduces the Mirror Universe and Terran Empire, which subsequent Trek shows have fleshed out in more detail. And finally, the Season 2 episode Assignment Earth is the only instance in Star Trek where time travel is treated as routine, with the Enterprise traveling back to 1968 for research purposes. They encounter Gary Seven, member of a group of humans abducted from Earth 4,000 years ago by an alien race from a distant part of the galaxy, and trained as supervisors to monitor Earth's technological and cultural development. As Memory Alpha notes, the Enterprise's routine visit to 1968 seems to indicate that the temporal prime directive is not in force yet, even though it is referred to in the Strange New Worlds episode Those Old Scientists, set 9 years before TOS Season 2, further demonstrating the apparent discontinuity between TOS universe and the post-temporal Cold War Prime universe depicted in later Trek. Overall, like I alluded to earlier, I still think that Season 1 contains a higher ratio of strong to weak episodes, but Season 2 is pretty strong as well. My favorite episodes from the season are, in no particular order, Amok Time, The Doomsday Machine, The Trouble with Tribbles, Journey to Babel, Obsession, The Immunity Syndrome, and The Ultimate Computer. And ones that don't work as well for me are Cat's Paw, Friday's Child, Who Mourns for Adonais, I'm Mud, A Private Little War, The Gamesters of Triskelion, and The Omega Glory, with the rest in between. But none of these are unwatchable by any means. And in particular, I'm Mud is the better of the two Harry Mudd episodes in the original series. Yet, as many have noted, Season 3 is kind of where TOS started to go off the rails, and there's some very specific reasons for that. With TOS having narrowly avoided cancellation after Season 2 thanks to a letter-writing campaign by fans, Season 3 retains mostly the same basic format from the previous season. Many episodes continue to serve as political parables, such as Day of the Dove, in which the Enterprise crew and the crew of a Klingon vessel are pitted against each other by the non-corporeal Beta-12A entity. The episode introduces the Klingon character Kang and carries a strong anti-war message and something of a reversal from Kirk's attitude in A Private Little War. Something else I didn't notice in Day of the Dove until my most recent rewatch is that we get a little insight into the Klingon Empire's motivations for imperial expansion, which is to acquire resources that are scarce in their home system. Much like with the Cardassian Union in the TNG era, this tidbit offers a little perspective on many of the Empire's actions. Let That Be Your Last Battlefield is memorable for its depiction of racial hatred and ends with the Enterprise unable to dissuade the two survivors of a dying civilization from continuing their bitter feud. And of course, there's Plato's Stepchildren, which introduces the telekinetic Platonians, who visited Earth during antiquity and forced the Enterprise crew to do a lot of things. Plato's Stepchildren may not have featured television's first interracial kiss, but it was still significant enough to be banned in multiple states. Kirk also falls in love with an android in Requiem for Methuselah, one of my favorite episodes of Star Trek, which introduces the character Flint the Immortal. But Kirk has one of his most significant romances in The Paradise Syndrome, in which he spends 3 months stranded on the planet Amarind, falling in love with and marrying a woman named Miramani. We find out that the people of Amarind were apparently transplanted there centuries ago by a race called the Preservers. Spock is tasked with deducing the symbols on a preserver obelisk that acts as a powerful asteroid deflector. The task was originally expected by the native population to be performed by Kirk, who has adopted the persona Kirok after the onset of amnesia, but Kirk's inability to do so leads him and Miramani to be stoned. Kirk survives the stoning, but Miramani, who is pregnant, suffers fatal internal injuries. While this episode's depiction of Native Americans has widely been criticized for playing into the noble savage stereotype, and Miramani is portrayed as not being terribly bright, I still look back on this episode with some fascination about the lore surrounding the Preservers. Later media, both canon and non-canon, have fleshed out the concept of an ancient humanoid race that intervened in the early evolution of many intelligent species in Trek's Milky Way. One of the most prominent examples is the progenitor race, who 4.5 billion years ago seeded the primordial oceans of countless M-class worlds with their genetic code, possibly making use of the mycelial network.
The mycelial network is like
mycelial network! Ronald D. Moore has speculated that the preservers and progenitors could be the same species, although the gigantic time discrepancy is kind of a hard pill to swallow, but this is the explanation used by Star Trek Online. Other stories draw a connection with Sargon's people from Return to Tomorrow, whose empire existed about 600,000 years ago. And indeed, in the episode, Spock does point out that the symbols on the obelisk are akin to musical notes that form an alphabet, a style of writing used by certain Vulcan offshoots. Spock attracts female attention in a number of episodes this season, season, one of the most notable being the Enterprise incident, which features Joanne Linville as a Romulan commander and establishes that the Romulans are now using Klingon ship designs, pointing to a Klingon-Romulan alliance against the Federation. Spock also has romantic encounters in The Cloudminders, which features a Federation member world called Ardana with a caste society, and All Our Yesterdays, probably the best episode of Season 3, in which Kirk, Spock, and McCoy are trapped in the past of the planet Sarpedon, whose sun Beta Niobe goes supernova. McCoy and Scott also find love in, respectively, For the World is Hollow and I Have Touched the Sky, featuring the Fabrini civilization and the asteroid ship Yonada that is on a collision course with the Federation world Darren 5, in The Lights of Zatar, which introduces the library planetoid Memory Alpha, namesake of the canon Star Trek wiki site. Chekhov has significant roles in Spectre of the Gun, which introduces the Melkotians, and The Way to Eden, featuring a band of space hippies. Sulu is given a chance to command the Enterprise in the infamous Spock's Brain for the first time since Errand of Mercy, and accompanies Kirk and McCoy on an away team in the episode That Which Survives, which takes place on an outpost of the extinct Kalandan civilization. The Tholian Web introduces the Tholians as well as the USS Defiant, whose loss in so-called interphase space is tied in with the Mirror Universe by the Enterprise episode In a Mirror Darkly. Spock also makes a comment that there is absolutely no record of a mutiny on a Starfleet ship, which is contradicted by Michael Burnham's mutiny and court-martial in Star Trek Discovery, although she is later pardoned and her record expunged. It's also worth noting that members of the Enterprise crew technically mutiny in earlier episodes like The Menagerie and This Side of Paradise. And we learn in the episode Whom Gods Destroy that the crew of Captain Garth of Izar, who commanded Federation forces at the Battle of Axanar, mutinied against him as well. By the way, exactly whom Garth defeated at Izar has never been revealed in canon, though the original script for the DS9 episode Valiant would have had Nog confirm it was the Klingons, and part of the build-up to this battle is depicted in the brilliant fan short Prelude to Axanar. Overall, as I alluded to earlier, Season 3 contains a higher proportion of weaker episodes than the previous seasons. One of the chief reasons for this has to do with NBC's battle with Roddenberry over the show's time slot. Roddenberry was originally promised an early evening time slot of Mondays at 7:30 p.m., but this would have required NBC to move their top-rated series Laugh-In from 8 to 8:30. This led Laugh-In producer George Shalter to threaten to take his show to another network. NBC capitulated, forcing Star Trek to air in the only remaining slot on the schedule, Fridays at 10 p.m. That's right, the Friday night death slot. Roddenberry then threatened to take Trek to another network unless he was promised Mondays at 7:30, but NBC rejected the threats due to the show's low ratings. Roddenberry kept the post of executive producer for Season 3, but he actually did leave for MGM to pursue other projects. As a consequence, scripts were no longer revised by him, nor by Gene Kuhn or DC Fontana, who had left the series earlier. Because of this, script quality is widely considered to have suffered immensely, and I have to concur with that. Season 3 has quite a few of what I'd call stinkers. Now, mind you, we're still talking about Star Trek, so it's still higher brow than a lot of the schlock you'd find on television in any decade, but Season 3 just isn't the same. While I consider the Enterprise incident, the Tholian Web, and All Our Yesterdays to retain much of the peak writing quality of the previous seasons, much of Season 3 takes Trek's camp and turns it up to 11. Absolutely trash episodes like Spock's Brain, which at least still has some entertainment value, are accompanied by, in my opinion, unwatchable outings like And the Children Shall Lead and The Way to Eden. Then there's a cadre of episodes that are simply forgettable, like Spectre of the Gun, The Empath, Wink of an Eye, That Which Survives, and The Lights of Zatar. At least The Mark of Gideon and The Cloudminders have some semblance of a commentary about overpopulation and classism, but are overall rather mediocre, while the more interesting The Savage Curtain is at least memorable for introducing the father of Vulcan logic, Surak, 21st century despotic Earth militia leader Colonel Philip Green, and founder of the Klingon Empire, Kahless the Unforgettable. I do think, though, that Day of the Dove and Let That Be Your Last Battlefield are strong enough for their political allegories, even if the latter's is extremely obvious. For the World is Hollow, Plato's Stepchildren, and Whom Gods Destroy mainly commit the crime of being overly campy. And then there's Turnabout Intruder, in which a bitter former lover of Kirk's, Dr. Janice Lester, switches bodies with Kirk to live out her fantasy of being a starship captain. You see, she says,
"Your world of starship captains doesn't admit women."
But many fans have interpreted this comment to be about how being a starship captain doesn't leave a lot of time to have a family, rather than women being actually barred from service. Since we of course see Captain Erica Hernandez of the NX-02 Columbia in Enterprise, and Philippa Georgiou of the Shinzo in Discovery. I actually rate Is There in Truth No Beauty, which features Diana Muldaur again and introduces the non-humanoid Medusan species, higher than most, and A Line of Troyes is passable too. But Turnabout Intruder being the series finale certainly didn't help. I was originally going to make a separate video about the animated series, but to be honest with you guys, I don't think it's very good. The show does make some noteworthy lore contributions, so I thought I'd at least talk about it a little bit, along with some background. After TOS experienced a resurgence in popularity and syndication, NBC realized they'd kind of really screwed up by canceling the show in the first place. However, they'd scrapped or sold most of the production assets, of course, meaning revitalizing the show in live action would be too cost prohibitive. Thus, the animated series was born. In my view, though, there are really only 2 episodes of the animated series that I think are worth watching. The first being Yesteryear, in which Spock uses the Guardian of Forever to save himself from being killed as a child in Vulcan's Forge, and the Slaver Weapon, which introduces the cat-like Kzinti, whom I made a video about along with the Caitians last year. Link in the description. By the way, this was the first Star Trek video on my channel edited by my magnificent editor Tim. I also kind of like How Sharper Than a Serpent's Tooth, which introduces the alien Kukulkan who visited Earth in the ancient past and... This episode is basically just Who Mourns for Adonais again, isn't it? Well, it's got some wonderful animation in it, and Trekspertise has an interview on his channel with the writer of this episode, Russell Bates. Uhura gets to be a badass and sees command of the Enterprise in the Lorelei signal, which is otherwise a pretty poor episode. And a lot of fans also rate the series finale, The Counterclock Incident, which introduces former Enterprise Captain Robert April, quite highly, but I just don't get the appeal. The logic of the time-reversed parallel reality they visit is so mind-bogglingly god-awful that it just takes me out of the episode. It's enough to make the animated series feel like it's not canon. Actually, in 1988, the animated series was officially removed from canon at the behest of Gene Roddenberry, with the exception of some parts involving Spock's youth. Indeed, Yesteryear has always been considered at least semi-canon by much of the production staff of Star Trek, with many elements like the city of Shakar, Vulcan's Forge, the Salot, and more being referenced in feature canon installments. Despite Roddenberry's request, though, Memory Alpha recognizes TAS as a valid source of information, and StarTrek.com considers it to have been added back to canon as of 2006. And besides Yesteryear, other canon productions have incorporated callbacks to the animated series as fun nods. Star Trek VI canonized Kirk's middle name, Tiberius. In DS9, Kor mentions the vessel he commands in the TAS episode The Time Trap, the IKS Klothos. DS9 references fauna from the Edosian homeworld, an homage to Lieutenant Eric's. The Rec Room from The Practical Joker serves as the basis for the holodeck in TNG and the holographic battle simulator in Discovery. The act of entering warp nacelles later appears in TNG and Enterprise. Caitians are brought into live action in Star Trek IV. Ship classes from the animated series have been incorporated into the remastered versions of multiple TOS episodes. Robert April has been featured in multiple episodes of Strange New Worlds, and Lower Decks, in addition to showing the skeleton of Spock 2 from the TAS episode The Infinite Vulcan, has featured several alien species first introduced in TAS like Caitians, Aurelians, Vendorians, Edosians, and Kzinti, as well as Kukulkan and a member of EM3 Green species. By the way, there's a popular myth that the reason there's so much pink in the animated series is because director Hal Sutherland was colorblind. While Sutherland was in fact colorblind, Irv Kaplan, who was in charge of choosing paint colors, was not, and was very conscious of the colors he selected. TAS also makes quite a few unfortunate visual continuity errors, and in fact, one of them that was fortunately caught before one episode aired was Uhura accidentally being painted with Nurse Chapel's colors, turning her white. Yikes. In any event though, while several aspects of the animated series were foundational to later Trek, I personally do find large swaths of it to be hard to reconcile with the rest of canon. I mean, hell, in one episode they randomly travel to the center of the galaxy. Like, no, the show's own rules make that impractical in the 23rd century, and you can bet I reserve that same criticism for Star Trek V.
What does God need with a starship?
But I do respect what TAS represented, a return of Star Trek to television, and what it means to a lot of people. I'm not even mad that Lower Decks makes so many references to it, because why not? Use the animation to your advantage and show off more of those non-humanoid aliens. I hope you enjoyed this stroll down memory lane, and now for the moment that all of you have been waiting for. Okay, maybe not, but where do I put TOS in my ranking of the other Trek series? Well, historically I've said that it's my third favorite behind TNG and DS9. While I do think that TNG has more episodes in its early seasons that I'd consider unwatchable, as a ratio of strong to weak episodes, I think TOS and TNG are rather competitive. So maybe tied for second? We'll see how this changes as I review the other shows. And keep your eyes peeled for a video about the TOS movies coming very soon. Hey guys, Tyler here. Star Trek as a franchise consists of hundreds of hours of television, meaning hundreds of hours of world building and character development in this optimistic future setting. But in my view, some of the most foundational world building for the series occurs in the first 6 feature films featuring the cast of the original series. Released from 1979 to 1991, these 6 movies, the motion picture, The Wrath of Khan, The Search for Spock, The Voyage Home, The Final Frontier, and The Undiscovered Country, helped carry the franchise during a period when sci-fi was becoming much darker in tone. And indeed, the TOS movies do mostly dispense with the camp of their predecessor, the film's more realistic production designs and more militaristic tone, serving as something of a soft reboot of Star Trek. In this video, I invite you to join me on a deep dive of the TOS movies as I examine their contributions to the overall lore of the Star Trek universe. Let's get started. The earliest efforts to produce a Star Trek feature film date back to 1967, in between the production of the 2nd and 3rd seasons of the original series. This never got off the ground, nor did Roddenberry's submission of a script in 1973 called The Cattleman, based on a story outline called A Question of Cannibalism from his original 1964 proposal for TOS, and vaguely similar to The Devil in the Dark. The next closest Roddenberry came to making a Star Trek film was in 1975, when Paramount Pictures, who now owned the rights to the franchise after their purchase of Desilu, contracted him for a movie with a $3 million budget. The script for this project, called The God Thing, bears a strong resemblance to what eventually became Star Trek V: The Final Frontier, leading Roddenberry to accuse director William Shatner of stealing his idea, as Roddenberry had given Shatner a beat-for-beat rundown of The God Thing in May 1975. Once again, this project fell through as the studio was not satisfied with the script. After a year of further revisions to the story being bounced around, in July 1976, a completely new concept, Star Trek Planet of the Titans, began development. Written by Chris Bryant and Alan Scott, Planet of the Titans was set after the Enterprise's 5-year mission and involved Starfleet competing with the Klingons for a claim to the supposed homeworld of the mythical Titans, the Greek gods, not the football team. The planet was pulled into a black hole, and after Kirk takes the ship through the black hole, the crew introduces fire to primitive humans thousands of years ago, becoming the Titans themselves. I have to say, I'm really glad this did not get produced because it sounds way too Chariots of the Gods, if you know what I'm saying. A rewrite of the film by Philip Kaufman involved the Enterprise crew being lured into the past by a strange spider-like being that had taken telepathic control of humanity and was trying to remake man, physically deforming its victims and inspiring many images of strange humanoid creatures from Earth mythology. The spider turned out to be the last man on Earth, the result of faulty genetic experimentation. This rewrite, too, was rejected by Paramount in 1977, but by this point, the studio had been toying with hiring directors such as Steven Spielberg, George Lucas, and Francis Ford Coppola, indicating they were still interested overall in continuing Star Trek in some form. In my retrospective series about Star Trek The Next Generation, I talked about an earlier Star Trek project that went on to influence both TNG and the motion picture, Star Trek Phase 2. In 1977, 8 years after TOS went off the air, Paramount announced plans to launch a new television network to rival ABC, CBS, and NBC. Following the rapid explosion of Trek's popularity due to syndicated reruns, Paramount greenlit a sequel series to serve as the network's flagship program. The studio brought Roddenberry back to serve as writer and executive producer. The series would have featured a refitted Enterprise on a new 5-year mission. By the summer of 1977, a pilot was written and ready to be filmed that fall, and construction on sets had even begun. Ultimately, however, the series and new network deal itself fell through due to lack of advertiser interest. At first, it seemed like Phase 2 was completely dead, but due to the success of Star Wars, Paramount opted to revive the project as a full-fledged major theatrical release, which eventually became Star Trek The Motion Picture. Many elements of Phase 2, including the Enterprise refit and several new characters, were carried over. Both the plot and script for Star Trek The Motion Picture emerged from the unproduced Phase 2 pilot In Thy Image. Bruce Logan, scheduled to be DP on In Thy Image, served as DP for the Klingon scenes in the motion picture. After Paramount approved a screenplay draft by Harold Livingston, who adapted it from his original script for In Thy Image, pre-production on the motion picture officially began in December 1977. The uniforms, props, and studio models originally created for Phase 2 were upgraded to meet cinematic standards, and Andrew Probert, who later went on to design many elements of TNG, was brought in as a concept artist to replace his mentor, Ralph McQuarrie, who was busy working on The Empire Strikes Back. After Stephen Collins became the final lead actor to be cast, principal photography began in August 1978, and a second unit crew was sent to Yellowstone Park to shoot the planet Vulcan scene. By November, the budget had grown to $24 million, but writing of the film's third act was not completed until after Thanksgiving. Principal photography wrapped in January 1979, with only a few second unit scenes and the visual effects outstanding, the latter of which extended well into the fall of 1979. Future General Corporation was signed on to do the visual effects in March, but it was not until July, less than half a year before release, that work even began on the interior studio models of Beeger. Post-production wrapped 2 days before the US theatrical premiere in December 1979. One of the things that first stands out to me about the motion picture upon rewatch is the score. Jerry Goldsmith's iconic opening theme is widely recognized today for being the title sequence music for Star Trek The Next Generation and the end credits theme for the TNG movies. But as many fans will remember, its origins date back to 1979. The Klingon battle theme has also become iconic too, later showing up in The Final Frontier, First Contact, and various TNG episodes. The motion picture marks the first time that Klingonese is spoken on screen, being developed by James Doohan before being further fleshed out by linguist Mark Okrand for Star Trek III: The Search for Spock. It's also the first time we hear the Vulcan language spoken in a coherent manner, rather than a few loose spur-of-the-moment exclamations invented for the TOS episode Amok Time. The Vulcan characters on screen in the motion picture were actually shot and recorded speaking English, with new words pulling inspiration translation from Sanskrit and German, later developed and dubbed over by the actors in post-production. This scene in particular shows Spock about to undergo the Kulinar ritual to purge himself of all emotion, but Spock cannot bring himself to go through with it as he senses the presence of V'ger approaching Earth. Fun fact, this scene has also been scrutinized for its apparent contradiction of the statement that Vulcan has no moon. But as we later learn, the two celestial bodies in the sky are Vulcan's sister planet Takat and its moon, Tarukamai. The motion picture additionally serves as the first time that we see Earth in the 23rd century depicted on screen, besides the Telosian illusion of a park near Mojave in the cage. Kirk has been promoted to Admiral, but he doesn't like pushing paper. He clearly wants to be a captain again. One of the other things that the motion picture is remembered for is its, shall we say, liberal pacing. The film is only 2 hours and 10 minutes long, but much of that runtime is spent showcasing the admittedly beautiful model and effects work in what has endearingly been termed starship porn. I will say that, to be honest, seeing the matte paintings of Earth and the model work of the refit Enterprise made me tear up during my rewatch, because, you know, I grew up watching these films, just like I grew up watching the TNG movies and the Kelvin Timeline movies. Anyway, the Enterprise is now under the command of Captain Will Decker, who production sources suggest is in fact the son of former commander of the USS Constellation, Commodore Matt Decker, as seen in the TOS episode The Doomsday Machine. The refit Enterprise features a main engineering deck and warp core that clearly went on to inspire the design of their counterparts in the TNG era shows. And much like how Will Riker and Deanna Troi are reunited under Picard's command in Encounter at Farpoint, Kirk, Decker, and crew are joined by Lieutenant Ilea, played by Indian model and actress Persis Kambata. A member of the Deltan race, known for their sexual prowess, she makes sure to note that her oath of celibacy is on record. The ever-present tension throughout the film between Captain Decker and Kirk, who usurps his authority, is certainly a compelling element of the plot. As Decker notes, Kirk hasn't logged a single star hour in 2.5 years, placing the film's date in approximately 2272 or 2273. But while the motion picture, epic in scope and scale, definitely is a cerebral event film and a technical masterpiece with beautiful visuals, like I said, it does kind of drag in some sections. Of course, V'ger as a phenomenon is fascinating from start to finish, with the big reveal of it being an augmented version of the Voyager 6 probe a fun sci-fi twist. Decker also confirms that the probe launched more than 300 years ago from their point of view, distinctly putting the TOS era in the late 23rd century. The identity of the machine race that augmented V'ger has been the subject of intense fan speculation for years and years, with many drawing a connection to the Borg. Spock even says resistance would be futile in the movie. That said, as I've explained before, I find this theory to be rather lacking. You can hear more about my thoughts on the matter in a video I made a couple years ago about this very topic, link in the description. In 1980, after the box office success of the motion picture, Paramount began planning a TV movie sequel. Gene Roddenberry submitted a script about the Enterprise crew having to make sure the Klingons did not stop the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Interestingly enough, the Strange New Worlds episode, Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, suggests the Romulans might have been involved with the assassination along with other major historical events like Chernobyl, suggesting that in the Trek timeline, JFK's death actually slowed down human progress rather than the other way around. In any event, this script was rejected, and he was taken off the project and relegated to the position of executive consultant. Ouch, that's definitely a title you make up to try and appease someone. The project was subsequently upgraded to a full-fledged theatrical feature, as it should be, and in November of that year, Paramount Television executive producer Harve Bennett submitted a one-page outline titled Star Trek: War of the Generations. He watched every episode of TOS in preparation for his task, and was struck by Ricardo Montalban's performance as Khan Noonien Singh in Space Seed. In addition to Khan, the themes of aging and death, as well as elements like Kirk's estranged lover and their son, were present as early as this draft. In it, Kirk is called to investigate a rebellion on a Federation world, and Kirk's son is one of the leaders of the rebellion. But we ultimately find out that Khan is the true mastermind behind it. In December December, Jacoby Swords submitted a 19-page treatment based on Bennett's outline, followed by a first draft script in February 1981. In this version of the script, Spock's death occurred just a little over a third of the way into the story. This is what hooked Leonard Nimoy to sign on to the project, as the opportunity to play Spock's death was too good for him to pass up. This draft was, by definition, even closer to the final version of the film and opened with Captain Terrell and his first officer, Pavel Chekhov, beaming down to Ceti Alpha 5, selected as a testing site of a new Federation weapon. Apparently, in this draft, during his isolation on Ceti Alpha 5, Khan had developed impressive telekinetic powers because reasons. By the time of the second draft in April, the title had now been changed to Star Trek: The Genesis Project. Now we're getting somewhere. The so-called Omega weapon from the previous draft was now changed to a terraforming device that, if it fell into the wrong hands, could be used as a devastating weapon. The new draft also introduced the character of Savick in the Kobayashi Maru simulation. A storyboarding process for special effects began, this time to be produced by Industrial Light and Magic, which would of course go on to dominate the industry in the coming decades. This was followed by another outline by Theodore Sturgeon in July, and a 155-page script titled The New Star Trek by Samuel A. Peoples in August, that completely did away with Khan, but this script was considered unfilmable. It was finally by September when the eventual writer and director of Star Trek II, Nicholas Meyer, became involved with the project, submitting a draft called Star Trek: The New Frontier. This draft emerged from a meeting between Meyer, Bennett, and producer Robert Sallin at Meyer's house, in which they took all the elements of the previous drafts that they liked and incorporated them into a new script. It was then followed by a second draft titled Star Trek: The Undiscovered Country, which would later go on to, of course, be the name of the sixth Star Trek film. The film's title would be changed by Paramount mid-production to The Vengeance of Khan, which Meyer hated, then to The Wrath of Khan, which Meyer hated even more, but was made to live with. Meyer was not directly involved in the casting of Montalban, but he did personally recruit Bibi Besh to play Dr. Carol Marcus, Merritt Butrick to play Dr. David Marcus, Paul Winfield, who later went on to play the Temerian Dathan in the TNG episode Darmok as Captain Terrell, and a young Kirstie Alley as Savick. After a third draft of the script was delivered, 12-week principal photography began in November 1981, lasting until late January 1982. Only cosmetic changes were made to the bridge set from the motion picture in the form of a darker repaint, and the set also doubled as the Reliant Bridge. The Enterprise's torpedo bay was, interestingly, a redress of the Klingon bridge from the motion picture. But one of the most significant changes is that the Starfleet uniforms were updated to the recognizable Navy-inspired red jacket design used in all the subsequent TOS movies. James Horner was also brought in to do the score, which he would also provide for Star Trek III, although Star Trek IV would have a different composer. Released in June 1984, The Wrath of Khan is considered by many fans to be the best Star Trek film, and many non-fans even consider it to be an excellent sci-fi movie. And while I do consider one of the other films in the series to be my favorite, which I'll get into in a bit, The Wrath of Khan truly is a masterpiece. The dialogue is very Shakespearean, but still accessible to a modern movie-going audience, and the vision of the future that Meyer brought to Gene Roddenberry's universe, while controversial, is, I think, pretty appropriate. The motion picture is Gene's vision to a T, in the sense that you have this powerful spaceborne threat in V'ger that, while dangerous, is ultimately revealed to possess a curious mind searching for answers to questions about the universe, much like its creators. It borders on a trippy kind of sci-fi energy that other epic science fiction films like 2001: A Space Odyssey and David Lynch's Dune capture as well. But like I said, the motion picture's cerebral qualities set it apart from what a lot of audiences are comfortable with. The Wrath of Khan's combination of smart writing with more exciting pacing helps propel it beyond its predecessor. Of course, this tonal departure is not without its critics. Again, Starfleet is presented as being more militarized in not just The Wrath of Khan, but the subsequent movies. David Marcus fully equates Starfleet with the military in his complaint that scientists have always been pawns of the military. This is somewhat contradicted by Kirk's statement in The Voyage Home that he's not in the military, though In that context, he's mainly referring to the US military. But either way, even though Starfleet is depicted as being more militarized in the TOS movies, it's still portrayed as what an ideal military looks like. Starfleet officers may be soldiers in not so many words, but they're also scientists, and Starfleet's primary focus is and always has been exploration. That they're called upon to defend the Federation could frankly be seen as strengthening the organization's integrity. There are still merits, of course, to these critiques, particularly in the aftermath of the Dominion War as referenced by Beckett Mariner in Lower Decks. But the TOS movies do a great job of making this world feel more lived in, and David's attitude towards Starfleet is still reflective of a society that, while imperfect, has provided a standard of living to the average citizen that we could only dream of today. Indeed, Carol counters David's remarks by saying that Starfleet has kept the peace for 100 years. This apparently does not take into account the various wars that the Federation fought with the Klingon Empire in the mid-23rd century, but it does evidently point to how Starfleet helped secure Earth's freedom in the wake of the Romulan War. The Wrath of Khan does take some other liberties with continuity, of course. For one, Khan famously says to Chekhov,
"I never forget a face,"
even though Chekhov was not in Space Seed, although this encounter could have happened off-screen. Regardless, this dramatic reunion works, and Montalban's portrayal of Khan, hell-bent on revenge, is legendary. We learn that Khan's wife, Marla MacGyvers, died after the Botany Bay survivors were marooned on Ceti Alpha 5. The planet suffered a harsh climatic shift after its orbit was disrupted by a black hole, which destroyed Ceti Alpha 6. We also get confirmation that the Botany Bay originally launched in the year 1996, a date which has at this point probably been retconned by the temporal Cold War as suggested in Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. The Wrath of Khan introduces Kirk's creative solution to the no-win scenario of the Kobayashi-Maru test, which was to reprogram the simulation so it was possible to rescue the crew. We see Kirk's implementation of this solution play out on screen in the alternate universe of the 2009 Star Trek film. And The Wrath of Khan is also the first film that introduces the phrase, "The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few," which will be repeated in dialogue in subsequent Star Trek films. This is most poignantly demonstrated with Spock's sacrifice at the end of the film to save the ship after the warp core has gone offline. But as we see, Spock's death is only the beginning of something new. Within days after the release of The Wrath of Khan, Paramount ordered Bennett to start writing Star Trek III. The film, ending with Spock being alive again, was in there from the start, and Bennett worked backwards from that conclusion to complete the script. The original draft, titled Return to Genesis, would have featured the Romulans arriving at Genesis instead of the Klingons and finding the world to be very rich in dilithium. The Romulans would have begun mining the planet, only for the miners to be killed by a feral Spock, whose aging was still tied to the planet in this draft. Upon hearing of the Genesis device, Vulcan would have threatened to secede from the Federation, bringing Kirk and the Enterprise crew to Vulcan to address this diplomatic crisis. After a copy of this story was leaked to fans in February 1983, Bennett was forced to rewrite the script, although it was actually director Leonard Nimoy who had the villains changed from the Romulans to the Klingons. The search for Spock is the first time we see the Earth space dock and Klingon bird of prey models, which have been reused in several Star Trek productions, including The Next Generation. We're also introduced to the Excelsior class, whose prototype carries a so-called transwarp drive. As I explained in my video about transwarp, this faster-than-light propulsion method likely takes the form of faster-than-normal warp travel and is deemed the Great Experiment. I also somewhat confusingly say that the drive is scrapped after the failed test depicted in the film, which is actually sabotage by Scotty, but has been speculated that this transwarp drive is what became regular warp in the 24th century, leading to a recalibration of the warp scale. Throughout the film, Dr. McCoy carries Spock's Katra, essentially his life essence, in his brain, transferred by Spock via mind meld in one of the final scenes of The Wrath of Khan. DeForest Kelley delivers a fantastic performance that captures both the disturbing and humorous qualities of a man essentially carrying two souls in his head and switching between Spock's manner of speech and his own. He even attempts a nerve pinch on a Lando Calrissian-looking motherfucker, but to no avail. Saavik in this film is played by Robin Curtis, as the salary for Kirstie Alley her agent demanded was higher than DeForest Kelley's, which was considered a non-starter by Paramount. Curtis's performance is definitely distinct from Allie's. Whereas Allie's Saavik had more of an emotional tinge to her, partly based on the fact that she was intended to be half Romulan, Curtis plays more of a typical Vulcan in this film, but I like both. Christopher Lloyd also plays Klingon Commander Krug, and Mark Leonard returns as Spock's father Sarek. The search for Spock has one of the most consequential third acts in the franchise, arguably, including not only David's death, which solidified Kirk's racist attitude towards the Klingons, but the destruction of the Enterprise, a ship these men and women have been serving on for decades. The search for Spock is definitely not as strong as The Wrath of Khan, and it does have quite a bit of middle-of-the-story energy to it. But I think it's better paced than the motion picture, and it's still an enjoyable film. And the ending containing Spock's reintegration with his Katra is very emotional. Nimoy fought hard with the studio to end the film on Vulcan, because he knew what it would mean to Star Trek fans.
Jim. Your name is Jim. Yes.
Release of the fourth Star Trek film, originally titled The Adventure Continues, was originally scheduled for summer 1986, but was delayed to allow William Shatner time to wrap shooting a season of T.J. Hooker before he could join the project. An early draft of the script featured a scene of Sulu meeting his great-great-great-grandfather in San Francisco, pitched by Bennett to George Takei. The child hired to play the character, named Akira Sulu, was not a professional actor, however, and the filmmakers could not get a performance out of him, leading it to be scrapped. The encounter survives in Vonda McIntyre's novelization of the film. Early drafts also had Saavik remaining on Vulcan as she was pregnant with Spock's child, implying the two had sex when Spock was undergoing Pon farr on the Genesis planet. And the character of Dr. Taylor was originally a male character, a wacky college professor and UFO nut to be played by Eddie Murphy. Murphy was a Star Trek fan, but chose instead to appear in another film, and the role was rewritten to be a love interest for Kirk. Catherine Hicks won the role. The second Star Trek production to be directed by Leonard Nimoy, The Voyage Home of course follows the Enterprise crew aboard their stolen Klingon bird of prey as they travel back in time to retrieve two members of the extinct humpback whale species, in hopes of having them communicate with a probe that is devastating Earth's climate. Nicholas Meyer was brought in to rewrite large sections of the 20th century scenes, and the result is without a doubt the funniest Star Trek film to date, and overall my favorite. I forgot how many times this movie made me laugh.
If we play our cards right, we may be able to find out when those whales are leaving.
How will playing cards help?
The Voyage Home is an early installment of Trek that, of course, promotes the idea that there are other forms of native intelligent life on Earth besides humans, namely cetaceans. That the humpbacks have been extinct since the 21st century in Trek's timeline was indeed a commentary on the contemporary problem of whaling and overfishing. The film also notably marks the first time that the slingshot effect method of time travel is used since the TOS episode Assignment Earth. And interestingly, The Voyage Home is, well, home to a number of firsts in Star Trek, continuity-wise. It's the first Star Trek film not to feature a Starship Enterprise as the primary setting of the story. It's the first time we see an Afrosian in Star Trek, a member of the USS Saratoga crew and the species of the Federation President in the Undiscovered Country. It's the first time we see a Cation in live action after Maresa's appearance in the animated series. It establishes that Kirk is from Iowa and that Sulu was born in San Francisco. To my knowledge, it's the first major instance of product placement in the franchise in the form of Michelob Beer, the Macintosh Plus, and Pacific Bell. And also to my knowledge, it's the earliest Star Trek production that distinctly claims Earth no longer uses money in the 23rd century, despite some evidently colloquial references to pay in the original series. Although Voyager establishes a New World economy emerged by the 22nd century that Strange New Worlds distinctly classifies as socialism. The Voyage Home also contains a number of fun time paradoxes. In order to obtain some money, Kirk sells the pair of antique glasses McCoy gave him for his birthday in The Wrath of Khan, noting that they will eventually become his present again. Famously, Scotty uses the Macintosh Macintosh Plus to show Dr. Nichols of Plexicorp the formula for transparent aluminum. Nichols is later credited as the inventor of this material, which is widely used in starship construction in later centuries. And Grandma even gets a new kidney. Towards the end of the film, the crew is pardoned for their actions in the search for Spock, with the exception of Kirk being demoted from Admiral to Captain, and is given command of the USS Enterprise NCC 1701A. Okay folks, let's get this one over with. We all kind of agree that Star Trek V is fucking awful. Director William Shatner first came up with the idea for The Final Frontier after watching a televangelist couple and being disgusted that they were purporting to be the harbingers of God and had become rich through donations from their followers. The film's pre-production and shooting schedules were severely trimmed due to the 1988 Writers Guild of America strike, and many shots were set up in mere minutes rather than hours. I'm just gonna tell you guys right now from experience that setting up a shot in minutes is what you do when you are A, working with a sunset, or B, in film school, not on a professional set. Herman Zimmerman was brought in as production designer and created a new set for the Enterprise A. Industrial Light and Magic was not contracted to do the effects for the movie as they were unavailable, so a lesser-known firm was hired, resulting in poor effects quality and some clearly unfinished shots. The film features Spock's never-before-mentioned brother Sybok, who is called to a place called Shakari by an alien entity claiming to be God. He lures the Enterprise crew to the planet Nimbus 3, jointly established as the planet of galactic peace by the Federation, Klingon Empire, and Romulan Star Empire 20 years earlier. The ship somehow travels to the center of the galaxy, something that would take decades even in the late 24th century, and surprise, it's not God. The film was considered so bad that Roddenberry deemed it apocryphal, although by this point he really had no real authority to do so. Larry Luckenbill does give everything he's got to this performance as Sybok, and this film also features the return of Jerry Goldsmith as composer for the first time since the motion picture. But between the rocket boots, the bad effects, and everything else, this film nearly killed the Star Trek franchise. It truly is borderline unwatchable, although maybe not as unwatchable as Star Trek Insurrection or Star Trek Nemesis. That's right, I am still going to die on that hill. Star Trek VI: The Undiscovered Country was almost never made, given the disastrous outcome of the previous film. But no one wanted to end the TOS cast on that low of a note, so a sixth film was commissioned with the stipulation that it not exceed the budget of $5 by even $1. Bennett proposed a Starfleet Academy prequel, which was actually greenlit by the studio and was in pre-production for 18 months before it was scrapped. Titled The First Adventure, it featured some superficial similarities to what eventually became the 2009 Star Trek reboot film, but the two projects' plot lines were substantially different. Upon being accepted into Starfleet Academy, Kirk meets Bones, Scotty, an alien cadet named Calabar, and a love interest named Cassandra Hightower. It sounds like a romance novel. The script depicts a version of Star Trek's future in which slavery still drives the economies of various Federation worlds, and racism is still so strong that Spock experiences a beating at the hands of Calabar and his cronies. Kirk, Spock, Scotty, and McCoy would have stolen a starship to fight Calabar, who attacks Starfleet over being expelled. This script was vociferously denounced by the likes of Gene Roddenberry and members of the TOS cast, such as Walter Koenig. The studio turned to Nimoy for ideas, and in a meeting, Nimoy suggested a story involving the Federation and Klingon Empire as an allegory for the real-world decline of the Soviet Union. Nicholas Meyer was brought back to direct. A prologue originally planned for the film would have established that prior to being called back into service, Kirk was in a revitalized relationship with Carol Marcus, McCoy had become a public nuisance by showing up drunk to events, Spock was engaged in classified activities, Uhura was a radio show host, Scotty was a professor, Chekhov was a chess grandmaster, and Sulu was a taxi driver on a backwater alien colony. I'm not really sure how that would have squared with him being the captain of the Excelsior, but it's not canon, so whatever. The prologue would have also featured the HMS Bounty being disassembled in space dock. last-minute budgetary limitations forced the filmmakers to cut this sequence. The film opens with the destruction of Praxis, a Klingon moon, in a clear parallel to the Chernobyl disaster. We see that Sulu, instead of being a taxi driver, is the captain of the USS Excelsior. See, that's what I just got through saying. Members of the old Enterprise crew are called to a meeting at Starfleet Command Headquarters. Present is Admiral Cartwright, played by Brock Peters, who was also present in The Voyage Home and went on to play Benjamin Sisko's dad Joseph in Deep Space Nine. After 70 years of unremitting hostility between the Federation and Klingon Empire, the Federation is to assist with an evacuation of Kronos and to take charge of a massive environmental cleanup project. The exact details of this evacuation are never revealed in canon, but we see Kronos is still inhabited by the late 24th century. The Enterprise crew is to rendezvous with the Klingon flagship, Kronos 1, and is tasked with hosting a diplomatic dinner with members of the Klingon High Council ahead of a peace conference. Kirk is livid that Spock would suggest Starfleet assign Kirk to such a mission given that, you know, Klingon bastards killed his son. We're introduced to Lieutenant Valeris, played by Kim Cattrall. Christopher Plummer famously plays the Shakespeare-quoting Klingon General Chang, and David Warner, who went on to play Jean-Luc Picard's Cardassian interrogator in Chain of Command, plays Chancellor Gorkon, a clear nod to Soviet Premier Mikhail Gorbachev. The dinner is riddled with faux pas. Faux pas? It's faux pas, right? I have the bachelor's degree. Such as Chekhov saying the Federation believes everyone is entitled to inalienable human rights, prompting Gorkon's daughter Ozitber to charge Chekhov with racism and decry the Federation as a
Homo sapiens only club.
Chang also says that the Empire needs breathing room, which Kirk notes is a quote from Adolf Hitler. Later, an unauthorized torpedo seemingly launched from the Enterprise seriously damages Kronos 1. After being accused of murdering Gorkon, an act that is really the result of a conspiracy involving Valeris and other disgruntled Starfleet officers, Kirk and McCoy are arrested. Their legal counsel at the trial is a man named Worf, played by Michael Dorn and suggested by publicity materials to be the other Worf's grandfather. Kirk and McCoy are found guilty of the crime by virtue of Kirk being responsible for what happens under his own command, and the two are sentenced to die on the Klingon penal asteroid Rurapente. They meet Martia, a member of the shape-shifting cameloid species. We find out that she has been promised a full pardon if she assists the Klingons in assassinating Kirk and McCoy by pretending to help them escape. Spock and the crew, still in control of the Enterprise, use facts and logic to determine that the Enterprise could not have possibly launched the torpedo. Spock remarks that an ancestor of his once said that,
If you eliminate the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth.
Suggesting Amanda Grayson may be a descendant of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. I don't know, maybe I'm reading too much into that. They find out where Kirk and McCoy are being held and travel to Rurapente to rescue the two officers. They arrive at the Khitomer Conference just in time to stop the assassination of the Federation president, and the conference proceeds as planned, solidifying a peace agreement between the Federation and Klingon Empire. It is after this that the Enterprise A is called in for decommissioning after approximately 8 years of service. Star Trek VI fills in the gaps of some background lore of the Star Trek universe that had begun to be filled in by the Next Generation. Specifically, the concept of a full-fledged alliance between the Federation and Klingon Empire was an optimistic projection of the two great powers' relationship during the 23rd century that was marked by periods of cold and hot war. And indeed, the end of history message that Star Trek VI carries makes it one of the stronger films in the series overall. Meyer's directorial skills and the film's Shakespearean dialogue are carried over from The Wrath of Khan, and the uncovering of the conspiracy makes for a thrilling ride. Originally, it was to be Savick who was the traitor, but Roddenberry rejected this as he felt Savick was too popular a character with fans to take her character in this direction. Of course, Roddenberry had no authority to make this decision, and Meyer was kind of tired of Roddenberry continuing to intrude on the creative process. Meyer wanted Kirstie Alley to reprise her role as Savick, but as she was at the height of her popularity with Cheers, her salary would have been too cost prohibitive. It was then decided to change the character, which is how Kim Cattrall landed the role. Meyer also wanted James Horner to provide the score again, but Horner felt his career had moved beyond Star Trek. Overall, Roddenberry, who disavowed large swaths of the post-motion picture Star Trek films after being demoted to executive consultant, was displeased with many of the military aspects of the Undiscovered Country. In fact, he even summoned a meeting with Meyer that included heavy legal representation that turned into a shouting match between the two men. Meyer later regretted his behavior, especially since at the time Roddenberry was very ill. Roddenberry died in December 1991, mere days after seeing the film. I've thought a lot about this, and even though I always say that Deep Space Nine is my favorite Star Trek show, I think that the TOS movies are my favorite incarnation of Star Trek. Like I said, even though Starfleet is more militarized in these films, particularly from The Wrath of Khan onward, it's sort of an idealized version of the military. And the setting of these films is still presented as a post-scarcity, quasi-utopian society. Even though humans still face outward threats and have personal inward struggles like coming to terms with aging and death, I would have no problem living in this era of the future. As I mentioned at the beginning of this video, the TOS movies serve as something of a soft reboot of the franchise, sort of grounding it in a way that I think makes these films hold up the best out of any pre-90s Star Trek productions. So what's your favorite TOS movie, and what parts of my analysis do you agree or disagree with? Let me know down below. And before I go, guess I might as well rank these, right? At the bottom, I'd put The Final Frontier without any hesitation. It really is that bad. At number 5, I'd probably have to go with the motion picture, simply because even though it's very beautiful, I'm gonna pull a Gen Z and say it's too slow for me. In 4th, I'd put The Search for Spock, which, as I stated, is not as strong as the top 3, but is still quite enjoyable. In 3rd, I'd put The Undiscovered Country, The Wrath of Khan in 2nd, and The Voyage Home in 1st, as I said, it's my favorite. There you go. With that, thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a thumbs up down below and don't forget to share it. That stuff really helps me out. If you haven't subscribed yet, be sure to do that as well so you won't miss future uploads, and click the bell icon to receive all notifications. If you want to support my work even further, you can become a patron at patreon.com/OrangeRiver, link in the description, or become a YouTube member by clicking the join button on my channel page. I just want to give a quick shout out to all of my donors who allow me to bring on outside talent like editors to make more high quality content for you to enjoy. By becoming a patron, remember you also get access to awesome perks like behind the scenes photos and videos, patron and member only polls, name in the credits, merch discounts, and more. Or you can drop a one-time super thanks or PayPal donation. All are appreciated. Links to my PayPal as well as my social media and merch store are in the description too. That's all I have for this week. Live long and prosper.